So I wanted to go ahead and make a video about a couple of different things that I've recently kind of stumbled across, just passing interest, just because guns are my hobby. Not necessarily, one of those guys that has to buy everything with tactical intent. I primarily use guns to shoot competition. Basically 90% of the use that I get out of guns is essentially shooting matches and practicing for matches. So the other 10% is essentially spent, carrying. I do have some concealed carry weapons and I do pretty much carry everywhere I go. But really at this point, that whole idea of, training for tactical purposes, I don't really care about that anymore. I basically just train to be able to shoot well according to the standards that I find useful, and those standards are basically really simple. And that standard is to be able to shoot as accurately as possible, as fast as possible, under pretty much any circumstance. So yeah, circumstances do change, but match pressure is pretty intense sometimes. So I like to think that that's a pretty good test of how you're going to control your body under stress. Obviously, games are not the same as a real life encounter, but as far as I'm concerned, training in a tactical manner is also not the same kind of stressor as fighting for your life. So anyway, putting that aside, I've pretty much lost my marbles and decided that I was going to get a Beretta 92. Basically the gun that nobody shoots in competition anymore. There's like 5 guys, 4 of those guys are super awesome and really good at what they do with the gun. But everybody else has kind of fallen by the wayside and decided that they're going to go ahead and shoot something else simply because they want to. Or I guess, in the case of that Ben Steger guy, who's, a halfway decent shooter, he decided that he didn't want to try and chase down guns that were no longer being produced. So he went to something that's a current production model, and it seems to be working out pretty well for the guy because, he wins a couple of matches a year in D class or whatever, he's unclassified or something. So at any rate, what I ended up picking up was the Beretta 92A1, let me rephrase that, the M92A1, and I bought it for a couple of reasons, and that's what this video is going to be about. In my mind, I've got here the pistol that has pretty much all the features that I want for competition, and we're going to go over those features because this gun has them. This gun doesn't really, because one thing that I do want to say, and I've read this on the internet and I think that it bears repeating, Beretta couldn't market free sex. They do not have a model on the market right now that I believe to be desirable at all. The PX4 Storm is a cool pistol, but for concealed carry, it's a big bitch. So it doesn't fit into that niche, at least in my world. For competition, they offer a gun with a 4-inch barrel, nothing larger. So why? Generally speaking, in competition, guys want barrels, myself included, that are at least 4 1/4, but longer. And the reason being, we want to be able to make power factor. And you can load your ammo with less powder with a longer barrel and achieve higher velocities, but still make power factor. So the whole idea there is that Beretta used to have some awesome models. The Elite 2 series, some of the Vertec models, 92G SD was pretty awesome. All those guns were basically developed by guys that are either killing people for a living, for a living, or were really seriously kicking some major ass at the shooting sports. So what Beretta decided to do was they decided to come out with these models based upon the feedback from those guys. Some names that come to mind are Todd Green, Ernie Langdon, and Super Dave Harrington. They basically decided to tell Beretta, hey look, this is what we want you to produce, and Beretta did produce them for a short amount of time. For whatever reason, Beretta decided they didn't want to. They went off on another track entirely, and they currently have a model offering in this day and age that is, in my mind, still stuck in 1980. So let's get into it. I chose the M92A1 because it had the most features that I wanted out of what they offered. So what I'm saying is that there's no perfect model. So what I need in a competition pistol is as follows. I absolutely must have dovetailed sights. I have to have a dovetailed front, I have to have a dovetailed rear, because no gun on the market comes with sights that in my mind are what I need. I actually recently shot a match this past weekend with a young guy, probably in his early 20s. He was shooting limited with a Glock 22 and he still had the factory sights on there, and this kid kicked ass. He was extremely, extremely good, very accurate. For shooting limited, he shot very few points down. In the entirety of the match, he had maybe 10 or 11 Cs, maybe a few more, but he really shot very accurately with those stock sights. Now, that's not something that I would ever want to do. Could I do it? Maybe, but I wouldn't want to, because in my mind, since I'm not that great of a shooter, it's just handicapping me even more. So I have to have dovetailed front and rear sights. Right now, we have the factory sights on there. They're a 3-dot setup. You've got a 125 thickness front, and you have a 150 notch or thereabouts in the rear, which is actually a pretty good light bar ratio. But naturally, because Beretta is awesome, they managed to put 3 dots on there. Now, the reason why I don't like 3 dots are basically because I like to focus on the front side. Front sight. When you've got 3 dots set up on the gun, what you end up doing is you end up having your focal plane drawn back to this rear sight. The rear sight is just a reference, it's a window, you look through it. So having anything on it that's going to grab your focus or your attention is, in my mind, utterly worthless. So these sights are going to go. I'm going to end up replacing them with a Dawson front and probably either a Novak or a Wilson rear. I don't like the Wilson rear, but it's, like I just said, it's one of 2 options. So I have very few options in that regard. So I have to have replaceable sights. The next thing that I have to have is decent checkering on the frame. Now, this particular gun actually has checkering that I like, and it's not checkering, it's just simply lines, and they're vertical lines. And the reason why I like this is simply because it prevents your hand from moving sideways. I don't particularly care about up-down movement all that much because I generally get on the gun and stay rooted to it. So having cross-hatch checkering is not really all that big of a deal because I generally tend to find the gun slipping in my hand from side to side rather than up and down. So this actually has pretty nice checkering on it. So currently the only model that Beretta produces that has a dovetailed front sight is this gun, the M92A1. So I had to buy a railed frame, which I didn't particularly want, but again, I had to buy it because I wanted that removable front sight. So that's what I had to get. So let me go ahead and go over a couple of things that I've done to this gun, and we'll talk about them real quick. The other thing that I have to have is a bevel magwell. If I don't have a bevel magwell, I'm an unhappy camper. So what I did was I interpreted the rules in the USPSA handbook, and or I should say rule book, and pretty sure, as per some old John Amadon rulings, you can bevel the magwell provided you don't exceed a certain increase in width or diameter, or I have no idea. But I'm pretty sure that this is legal. So what I did was I actually added a bevel and I enlarged the corners here where the magazine goes in to prevent it from hanging up. So what I essentially ended up with was a fairly smooth magwell. Now, it's not quite the same size as the P09, but it's not a bad size either once I added a little bit more real estate by removing some metals. So as you can see, it's already getting kind of, worn down. I just use a very simple gun coat. I just sprayed a little bit in there, but gun coat is not very durable. So it didn't really stick very well and it's starting to wear off, but I don't care so long as the metal doesn't oxidize. And it's aluminum, so we should be good to go. So I've got a beveled magwell, I've got my removable front and rear sights, which will get changed out shortly. I'm currently experimenting with a set of Vertex style grips that I got off eBay. These bad boys are a coppery orange color that I thought was pretty cool. And what this essentially does is it gives me a thinner grip from side to side, which actually is pretty darn similar to my P09 in thickness. And I have a little bit less meat back here simply because my hand isn't that big. So if you compare this to guns that are currently on the market, what I would compare this to with this grip setup would be a 1911 with an A1 arched mainspring housing. So it's actually pretty cool. I'm still experimenting with it to find out whether or not, this gun is gonna track reliably for me with these grips. I may end up getting a set of VZs, but VZ, if you're listening, I don't understand why you only add texture here. I don't know anyone that grips a gun down here. I mean, that would be awesome if we were still in 1980 and shooting with the cup and saucer grip. But please, add texture where normal humans grip the gun, please. When I grip, everything that I need as far as grip is right here, and when I take my reaction hand, my left hand, and put it on the gun, when I take this hand away, look at where my hand is. It's not here. So that's just a note to VZ if you're listening to this. Please add grip where we need it. So beyond the grips, I've added a Beretta factory extended magazine release. One thing I will say is the regular factory release that came with the gun was unusable. Couldn't use it. It was impossible. My thumbs just aren't long enough, the grips are too fat, I had to shift the gun too much in my hand to be able to drop the magazines. Whereas here, they go in easily and there's no shifting of the gun in order to be able to reload. So that is an essential part in my mind. I know Wilson Combat makes a few of those with a little bit more aggressive texturing, or the Wilson Combat logo, which is pretty cool. But for me, I wanted the OEM factory parts, that way this would still be production legal. Now, some other things that I've changed around on the gun. I have Wilson Combat hammer springs in here, and I have a Wolf 11-pound recoil spring on the Wilson fluted guide rod. The reason why they flute it is aesthetics, and also one of the things about these guide rods is that because they're fairly large diameter, the fluting supposedly helps to kind of take crud and debris and move it away from the spring coil, so that way you don't get any kind of coil bind or just general weird cycling with the gun as it's reciprocating under fire. So I've got currently a 13-pound hammer spring, which I'm experimenting